Today I want to talk about the economy and climate change, and I want to tell you a bit more about why we need to think of the flaws that we have at the moment in the way we calculate the success of our work. A few months ago, the biggest asset manager in the world, Larry Fink, released his annual letter to tell what he thinks the future holds in 2022. And what the announcement said was that the next 1,000 unicorns were going to be companies decarbonizing the planet. Companies working on energy efficiency, waste management, sustainability. You might wonder why the biggest asset manager, the person that has a big stake in Apple, Microsoft, would consider that this is an important thing to say. How did we really get here? How did we get to the point where an economic system that is normally self-perpetuating itself by investments in fossil fuels quite often is talking about decarbonization? If we look at the growth of our economy, the last 10 years have not been easy. We've been having consistently staggering situation where we've been moving between 3 to 6%. And there's been unfortunate events like COVID that didn't make it easier. In the same time, there's been a massive increase in emissions, which unfortunately we've known about for now more than a century, but still, we have been pushing this statistic up as we've been going down the line. To make it worse, and probably quite deeply correlated to how this economy, plus also how the situation on the emissions level is happening, we're at the moment consuming 1.7 Earths, which is 0.7 planets more than what our planet is able to give us. You're probably thinking, okay, this cannot get any worse. Well, it can, because it's quite expensive to be doing what we're doing. For the last 10 years, there's been a 150% increase in the costs for climate-related disasters. Well, that is not necessarily a lot of good news to start with, and it's quite a lot to digest if we're all thinking to build companies around the topic. The key learning from all of this is that you cannot manage a planet and a business on a failing Earth. And the reason for this is that our economy at the moment, in the way that it calculates itself, the way that it looks into all of the key indicators that define success, is a bit messed up. The good news is that there's a lot of opportunity for each one of us to contribute to the improvement of the situation. How many of you here are founders? How many of you here are investors? Nice. Now you understand the financial risk playing out. The first learning that I've gathered over the last 6 years is that you need to educate yourself. What has been really clear and has been demonstrated by this beautiful site is that we're still nowhere close to making sustainability part of the day-to-day. This year is a beautiful demonstration of greenwashing. For those of you that don't know, greenwashing is the concept of using marketing for the purpose of promoting yourself, of course, but sustainability embedded into the value proposition. The point of educating yourself is that it would allow you to really understand how sustainability is at the moment really hindering the capacity for our economy to be able to grow. The second key learning that I've gathered over the last few months, and especially last few, I would say, years of working with more than 1,000 companies, is that you need to set the basics right. I always like to give the metaphor of this iceberg, and the idea in this is that a sustainability strategy for a business needs to be incredibly solid at the bottom, hidden somewhere under the surface. And what you show off, all the stories about climate neutrality, carbon neutrality, having a sustainability label here and there, a sustainability product line, should be only the byproduct of you having a really well-developed, balanced understanding of why sustainability really matters for your business. In the case of some of the companies we work with, companies like BMW, Société Générale, and many others, this is a massive challenge because you're thinking of sustainability as something that is fundamentally shifting the way companies understand themselves. If you think of a normal automotive company, they look at their past and they're thinking, we've been making money out of combustion engines. And you're now telling me I need to become sustainable? Sure. I'm going to release a renewable energy powered car. I'm going to put some green on my logo. It's actually a lot more complex than this if you really do want to do it properly. And what many of these companies face as a challenge is the reality that it's going to cost them a lot of money. They don't know how to do it, and they don't have the experts in-house. If you look at this iceberg and you're thinking about your own company, your own fund, you need to understand that after you've educated yourself, there's quite a lot of KPIs that you probably would need to start gathering. There's quite a lot of people that you need to bring on board, resources, time, but also the possibility for a conversation. Because people are quite scared. There's quite a lot of people that are quite concerned in what's going on. And most likely these are people within your teams. These are people that are quite close, but because this topic is not at the forefront of your value proposition, they don't feel comfortable to talk about it. One question that we often get when we work with businesses is related to like, how do I become sustainable? And it's kind of the one where you're like, where do I start? I love data. My company is built on data. So without making this incredibly technical, I want to explain to you a concept that is fundamentally important for you to think of sustainability as something that essentially defines the future of your company. There is a framework called the GHG protocol that looks into how emissions are internationally calculated. This is a well-renowned, well-accepted, fundamental understanding of how we look into emissions. Scope 1 is the emissions from your facilities and vehicles. Scope 2 is related to the electricity, the heating, the cooling that you purchase. Scope 3 is your suppliers, logistics, investments, end of use of products. So how do consumers use the products? Commute, travel. What you see here, which is this bright colored view, is actually the definition of what a company can do when it sits within its own realms, within its own office, and make a difference. It matters, of course, in which industry you are, on how fundamentally you can impact this change. Yes, there's quite a lot you can do in the construction industry. There's quite a lot you can do in the chemicals industry. But as we go down the line, you see how it gets even trickier to think about sustainability without bringing along all these other different layers that I explained. And if you are considering sustainability to potentially become a priority for your company, you need to understand that all these elements there will be the key to your success and to any net zero strategy that is implemented at scale. For all the investors here, I'm sure this is no news, but for anyone else that maybe has not looked into the data, I would like to explain the concept of climate risk. Climate risk is essentially this idea of embedded risk associated to climate change. And I earlier explained that we have, of course, like a correlation where you have a lot of increase in climate disasters and therefore a lot of costs associated to that. And the reason for this is that infrastructure gets destroyed. There's a lot of ultimately unpreparedness in our society. Our cities are exploding and they're also not prepared for handling all of this shift. And to make it even more exciting, there's actually a financial bubble that is potentially going to burst. I know I've already dumped a lot of information on you, and I can speak about this for hours, and I promise you this is actually something that will give you an understanding of the magnitude of the problem. So, you remember the financial crisis. You remember 2008 when all of us indirectly or directly were impacted by the fact that a lot of value was lost overnight. There is another bubble that is building at the moment, and this is the carbon bubble. We heard last week that we're kind of on the verge of getting to be at less than 7 years worth of time to be able to stay at the 1.5 degree temperature increase. Predictions before that were saying that it's going to take us more than a decade. Well, if you think of the carbon budget that we have left, we're looking into this little bubble that is the grey one. If you think of the carbon budget that is related to staying below 2, there's a little bit more left. The rest of it is what is proven to exist as different reserves that are available to anyone to tap into. And this is where the bubble comes, and the bursting is also likely. All of the fossil fuel companies that we have out there are overvalued because they have a lot of subsidies that come from governments. That is something that is actually beyond true, in the sense that at the moment it's a lot easier for you to transport gas than it is to transport, and I'm speaking legal burdens, I'm speaking about all the different kind of legislative elements you need to cover, than moving a solar panel. Imagine this. So all of the big elements that are embedded into this big bubble are the idea that all of these overvalued companies that are within the fossil fuel industry are deeply embedded into our financial system. They're at the core of any bank that you look at. They're at the core of any different organization that is most likely even in a way sitting here, because it all trickles down from the banks that we use, from the different institutions we rely, our pension funds or our sovereign wealth funds. All of them are in one way or another connected. And this brings me to the most important bit, which is the fact that it's not about carbon. For the last 6 years, I have dedicated my life to climate change. And the reason for this is that in 2016, I found myself quite shocked on a beach in Morocco, where instead of surfing, I ended up cleaning the beach because it was covered in plastic. And my cute, successful job in finance after doing investment banking, then fintech, really didn't make sense in the context of something that was so much bigger than us. I spent a year after that educating myself about climate change. I was spending all of my free time, any given minute that I had available, to learn about carbon emissions, to learn about ecosystem collapse, planetary boundaries. And although it was really devastating to go through all of this information, I'm sure many of you have watched a lot of documentaries, have seen a lot of social media posts about this, have read a lot of scientific papers, but it kind of shook me to a level where I felt all of this information is enough for me to feel a level of responsibility that does not allow me to continue in the way that I've been doing so far. Long story short, I decided after 1 year of investigating that I'm going to quit my job and build Plan A. What Plan A does at the moment is a software as a service platform that helps corporates reduce their emissions. We work with private equity, with big automotive and other also not so big fast-scaling startups. To get to where I am today, which is a place where every single one of you can get to, not as a founder, but as a human that cares about this planet, it took me just the realization that I am, yes, one of many, and yes, my impact doesn't really maybe matter, because sure, I have a reusable bottle, sure, I don't eat meat, but how does this move the needle at scale? The fundamental shift that I went through allowed me to understand that I actually can have a lot of impact if I start thinking of domino effects. The domino effect that I experienced in my own life was that the moment when I educated myself, I ended up deciding that I wanted to build the basics. Then I decided to understand how this is going to shake the economic system and embed it into a product. For each one of you, there's a chance to use all of this knowledge and apply it to your day-to-day. I set out some of the basics of how you can kick off your sustainability journey as a company, but if you think that today this is not possible on that scale, you can decide to just do it for yourself. And what this really means is that this reality is really non-existent. The reason why I chose a picture, a painting, rather than a photo, is because this does not exist anymore. We cannot find it. There's very few places on this planet which are left untouched by the human mind, by the human hand, and they don't look like this equilibrium anymore. And how this can impact us in the long term is, at the first stage, making us all disappear one after the other. I know it sounds awful, but the planet will stay, and the planet will start rebuilding itself. But this ecosystem that we have been given, this beauty that we've been allowed to have access to, is actually the biggest responsibility we have in our lives. There is a lot that we've gotten for free on this planet, and it's actually available for us to tap into on a daily basis. You switch on the water, it's there. You go out for a walk in nature, it's there. You have fresh air, you're feeling comfortable and excited after that. Today I want to leave you with one message, and this is the idea that any knowledge that you've gathered today or before on this topic is your opportunity to take a chance on yourself to be an actor that is responsible for our planet. We all have a big chance to reverse this, but it's going to take all of us here and 200 million times more. But someone needs to kick off this journey. Are you in? Let's do it.
Thank you so much.